Shall we start? Oh, start? Good. Okay, cool. Hello. That have seen A11Y but don't know what it means. It's like a short version of accessibility. Not very accessible, but much easier to type. So yeah, this is the 24th London Accessibility Meetup. Put your hands up if this is the first time you've come. Oh wow, okay. So I think we've got about 80 people here. I reckon that's about half the room. Put your hands up if you work for the public sector. So that's probably about 15 people. Hands up if you work for the private sector. So that's much more. So call that 60 people. And hands up if you work for the third sector, like for a charity. If you work in education. Cool, okay. Hands up if you're a content person. So that's about 10 people. Hands up if you're a designer. About 10 people. Hands up if you're a developer. About 10 people. Hands up if you're a user researcher. About 10 people. Hands up if you work in policy. Hands up if you are an accessibility professional. About 10 people. Hands up if you do something else. And what do you do? Somebody shout out what you do. Testing. Hands up if you're a tester. Slightly more. And any other roles I've missed? Product managers. About 5 people. Awesome. Welcome. Okay, so with the London Accessibility Meetup, we try really hard to get good speakers to come and talk, but also to speak about a variety of things. So we've had talks about content, we've had talks about design, about user research, about code. Some of the most popular talks that we've had have kind of been case studies about how people are actually doing things. So I'm really excited to have Ceri from Scope talking about how they've been trying to embed accessibility in their organisation when they've been building new websites. We've also got a really interesting talk from David at Barclays, which will be looking at building inclusive products for vulnerable circumstances. The format will be, each talk will be about half an hour, and then there'll be some time for questions afterwards. As I say, either put your hand up and we'll bring the mic round, or ask using the app, and I will select some of those questions. We are live streaming tonight, and we have subtitles. If you're live streaming and you don't want to be heard, then I guess ask the question rather than using the microphone. I want to say a massive, massive thank you to Barclays. So Barclays provide us with sponsorship that helps us to cover our drinks, our food, the captions, and the video. So please say a massive thank you to Barclays. Hands up if this is the first time you've seen kind of live speech-to-text captions at an event. So that's probably about 10 people. So yeah, we have the magnificent Orla from My Clear Text. Also, for about the last 4 months, we've been live streaming these events, and we also publish videos of the talks. Normally get them up within a couple of days of the event being over, and this is all done by Meetup Video. So yeah, big round of applause to them as well. Also want to say a massive thank you to Sainsbury's, in particular to Raf. Where's Raf? So I think this is the best venue for meetups in London. Sainsbury's have been supporting us for over a year now, and they sort out the audio, they provide hosting for the drinks and food. So yeah, huge thank you to Sainsbury's for making this happen. I've got a little bit of admin, so if you need the toilet, if you head towards the lifts, the women's toilets are on the right and the men's toilets are on the left. There's not a fire drill planned tonight, so if there's an alarm, it's the real thing. So we'll just go out together in an orderly way. Big request is around litter. If you've brought in any cans or rubbish, please take it out with you. Sainsbury's are kind enough to lend us this beautiful venue. We need to make sure that it's in the same state as when we came here. So yeah, please do take your litter out. And with that, we will start with the talks. So yeah, really excited to have Ceri speaking here tonight. So Ceri wrote a blog post about the launch of the Scope website about a month ago, wasn't it? So as soon as I saw that blog post, it was like, that would make a brilliant talk, so I got in touch, and fortunately Ceri was really keen to come and talk. So if you can put your hands together and say a big thank you, I will get it started. Oops. Bear with me 30 seconds.
Is this on? While I was doing that, I was planning to do a similar kind of thing in terms of asking for show of hands. He's kind of stolen that, but I'll keep the very last bit of that. Can you put your hands up if you live and breathe accessibility? It's kind of what you do every day. Yeah, and then kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. Put your hands up if it's a relatively new thing. You're kind of on a journey of discovery, trying to work out how to do it. So about half and half. Okay. So I was certainly not too long ago exactly where you are. And I'm certainly not at the kind of other end of the spectrum. I'd like to think I'm kind of in between knowing something and having the privilege to lead a really great team who know an awful lot more about this than I do. It's a real privilege to be here tonight to talk about what we've achieved and our story and our journey. So the main title is How We Define and Embedded a Culture of Inclusive Design and Accessibility. But what the project was known in my head for quite a long time in the beginning was, help, we're building a new website. So my journey to this started about 10 years ago. I had the pleasure of running a small web development company in South Africa with my wife, and life didn't look too dissimilar to this, except I wasn't smartly dressed, and I was in the pool, and the laptop was out of the pool, which seemed far more sensible. And then we started a family, and we moved back to the UK. We were living with my parents for a few months, trying to run our agency still, and realized it wasn't quite going to work, wasn't quite as easy, kind of transferring a business between countries. And one of us had to get a job. So started the job hunt. And I was lucky enough to get an interview, a telephone interview, and about half an hour before the interview, I thought, okay, I need to just go through this job description, familiarize myself, make sure I understand it. And this phrase I've highlighted jumped out, an understanding of WCAG 2.0 accessibility standards. I had no idea what this is. I said to my wife, help, let's quick get Googling. So we found out Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, great, but then this huge, long, impenetrable document, way too much to understand in suddenly 30 minutes, or less than that by the time we got there. Fortunately, that never came up in the interview, and I got the job, so that was really good news. I was there, and that was for an insurance company. It was known for telling people to calm down. Sold Bonza car insurance. I hope you're getting the brands. I was there for a number of years, and then I had various roles in travel. And I have to say that accessibility really didn't feature much at all beyond in the job description. Kind of that should have an understanding, should know about. And it was, we had when I was in the insurance company, we had the classic letters on the font adjustment things. We thought, well, do people need that anymore? Surely browsers do all that. That was kind of a limit on understanding. And I think accessibility was very much considered like another thing. It was a check-boxing exercise, maybe a legal compliance exercise, but we didn't really understand the benefits of it. So then about 2.5 years ago, I joined Scope. Scope was going through a massive change, and it was a really exciting time to join. Scope's, as it says there, you probably worked out, is a pan-disability charity. And we're going through a huge transformation, huge strategic shift when we're deciding to sell about 2/3 of our business that we were known for, the schools, colleges, and homes and everything, that we were known for when we started back in the 1950s. We thought that's not right for Scope and how we can support disabled people and drive our mission of achieving everyday equality for disabled people. So right, we need to change. So we sold that part of the business, and we had big digital ambitions. And I think so many charities and so many organizations going through digital transformations, and I think we're probably doing it more far-reaching than most, and we're changing pretty much every system, all the way through from our CRM, our ERP, our finance systems. Pretty much everything's changing, which comes with a lot of opportunity. And certainly with CRM and having all this customer data and supporter data, I think, okay, there's an opportunity to connect here with the digital experiences. We're also launching a number of new digitally enabled services. And a huge investment in self-service content is a really big part of what we do now. Just overhauling all our content and how we support disabled people and parents of disabled children with the questions and the challenges that they have. And at this time as well, looking at the website, trying to kind of support all this, our website was out of date, needed updates, a few versions out of date. And we were also going through a big new brand change. This was what Scope looked like. The website 2.5 years ago when I joined. And while this was, while we're working on this, the new brand was coming, far bolder, a lot more clarity in terms of what we're doing. And this all led us to think, right, we need to launch a new website. This is kind of the natural thing we need to do. So we went through a process to get there, got the support from the board. They said, yeah, you can go ahead. And along with the classic ambitions we put in place, like we want to increase conversion rate or kind of get increased referral rate, whatever it may be, but specifically around accessibility, the number one thing I wanted to do, we had to be compliant. So it's real reputational risk. And this is the kind of thing that kept me awake. A nice thinking, be with an audience like you guys, we just launched and everyone's saying Scope don't know what they're doing. And it's like, oh, this is a little bit scary. But beyond that, what I was really, really keen to do, we had this amazing brand, really exciting. A lot of energy has been put into that. And I really want to demonstrate that great design can combine with great accessibility to create a really fantastic experience. And I think along with those other things I was saying about our perceptions of accessibility, I think from a designer perspective, our designers I've spoken to, I think someone is saying, well, accessibility, surely that's going to put me in this straitjacket, right? It's going to stop me being creative. And we're saying, well, no, we have to demonstrate that that's not the case. It's actually an opportunity to do something really amazing. And taking it a step further, some research I came across recently said that within our sector, in the charity sector, 95% of charity sector websites in the UK don't comply with WCAG guidelines, which is really shocking. It's really surprising. So we were really keen, right, let's do it, and let's show others how to do it as well. So it's really exciting. I'm here tonight to kind of start this journey of talking about it. But that all led to this panic moment. Like, what do? We need a plan. We built a great team, some really good people. We knew how to build stuff. We knew about user experience. We knew how to create great experiences. I had a couple of people in my team who are very experienced with assistive technology, working with disabled people, so they understood that side. We had some of the other people in my team knew about kind of HTML and CSS and design, and we kind of took those two things together to start this journey. And in hindsight, looking back on reflection, there's 6 key things we did on our journey, both for the website and then how we embedded what we learned on that website into everything else we did. So I'm going to take you through those 6 now. First thing we did, great partnerships, is really important. We appointed Aqueduct as a developer and design agency for the project. And we made it very clear to them, look, accessibility is really important. They kept saying, yep, we got this. I said, no, accessibility is really important. Yeah, don't worry, you've got this. They've done it before. But we said, look, we're going to have to go above and beyond what you've done before. We also partnered with House Inclusion, so it's really good to see Jonathan in the audience today. And the 3 kind of teams together working very, very closely together, absolutely fundamental for the success of the project. So the next thing we did, we had to upskill ourselves really significantly. And again, this was with Jonathan's help. First thing we did was get everyone who was involved in the project, from the project managers and the product owners, together right at the beginning of the project. Right, how do we do this? And it was the thing that struck me straight away. It's like the classic experience of accessibility. You do it right at the end. Yeah, you do a checkbox exercise in your UAT or your QA stage, and you get this big report, and it's, oh my God, that's really scary and horrible. But what we did is make sure we considered accessibility throughout the project. Then we did training with our designers, our developers, our copywriters, And probably the biggest change we made was with our QA team. So the two guys I mentioned who are really experienced with assistive technology, then we trained up, with Jonathan's help, to really be able to do all the accessibility testing themselves. And they did a lot of it. And I think the key message that we got from Jonathan is we've got to be self-sufficient. And that was absolutely the big takeaway as well. So at the end of the project, we could carry on doing this by ourselves. We didn't need to lean on someone all the time to help us do it. The third thing we did, we really embraced the concept of inclusive design. I think Scope's been really conscious of the kind of co-creation. All the new services that we've been building over the last couple of years are all designed with disabled people and with disabled people's organizations. So a lot of testing, there's a lot of feedback that goes on to make sure that what we're building works for the audience we're building it for. So we consider this throughout each stage in the project. And for us, that was a lot of listening, a lot of asking questions, a lot of listening for people's needs and their experiences. So certainly at the discovery phase, we engaged with 12 people. In the design phase, we did about a 10-week design phase, and this is always all from flat designs through to interactive prototypes. Again, testing all the time. Does this work? Does this work for you? Alongside that, again, we're still working with Jonathan's team and getting expert reviews on this. So about halfway through this process, said, look, this is how far we've got. Can you let us know how we're doing? Again, that was really important to get this really critical comment. It wasn't too frightening, fortunately, but there were still things we could do that were really easy to fix and change at this point. We hadn't developed it yet, so it was relatively inexpensive to address. And again, that was helping to upskill the team. We learned a lot from this kind of feedback. And then to the build. I mean, it was a classic kind of waterfall type project when you had kind of discovery, design, etc. But we're building in 2-week sprints, so every time we had something was in the build that was just about testable, we would put it in front of people, we would get them to test it. And again, getting expert support on this as well. So we had 2 separate occasions where someone from Hassel Inclusion came in and sat with Aqueduct's developers and checked their code and kind of gave them advice along the way and helping them to upskill all the time as well. And that was really, really important. And then lastly, at the end, in UAT, again, testing with people. Huge amount of internal QA on this. Beyond this website going live, there was a number of other platforms with rebranding at the same time, so the same kind of testing was going on. I was talking to Andy, the guy on my team who led this and helped me develop this strategy. He reckons he made 24,000 tests over the course of about 2 or 3 months on this. It's really, really kind of significant work. But of course, during that time, he learned, and his team learned an awful lot on how to do this. And those reds, we have 1 red in that screenshot I took there, but it was really interesting seeing them turn from lots of red, lots of fails, and gradually seeing them turn green. And then at the end of the project, about a month before we went live, we throw it over to Jakub, wasn't it, over there. And we said, right, okay, we're now ready for an external audit. We're still releasing some functionality. We got to that stage, and again, some stuff came back, but it wasn't too scary. Stuff we could address quite easily. I think there's only 3 high defects we needed to address. But again, it's far easier getting that than the potentially really scary situation we might have been if we'd only done that right at the end. So that's what the project looked like overall. It's really interesting getting kind of combination of that inclusive design principles, really engaging with our audience, every step of the way. One thing I should have said is one of the really exciting things we're doing at Scope is we have our own panel of disabled users. We've got about 200 people on that panel now. It's growing all the time. And that's been so useful. At the start, we were using external recruitment agencies. But now when we do testing, we just tap into that panel, we bring people in. And it makes it just so much easier for us to test, which allows us to do this at scale and a lot faster and with a lot more agility. The other thing that I think gets overlooked quite a lot in accessibility is content. I think content doesn't get a huge shout out in the WCAG guidelines. It gets a few mentions, but that's not my garden, by the way, but it really could be. I naively thought, I said to my team, sure, we could just build this thing and lift and shift our content, right? It'll all magically work. They said, no, there, Ceri. We can't do that. Our website, our old website, is like an overgrown garden. It's a bit of a mess. It's kind of grown arms and legs over the years. We need to review this. So we did a big content audit. So we checked all the items, all the content. We had about 1,700 pages of content. Checked everything, decided what are we going to bin? Okay, what do we need to keep? What new content do we need? And then we went through a content design process with this. And I think if you look at our advice and support section on the website, it's a whole separate set of talks you can go to on that, because the work those guys are doing is amazing. It's really, really good. So there's a couple of hundred pages on that, but the rest of the site, we try to follow a similar kind of content design principle, but a lot lighter. Of course, getting everything into plain English. It still amazes me that the average reading age in the UK is something like 9 years old. So if you're not putting stuff in plain English, you're missing out on a large part of your audience. That's really, really key. And then a huge amount of information architecture, which is still going on now. As we launch and release new content, we review this, and this is kind of the mega menu process. We spent a lot of time designing, working through, making sure this could work. Because we really believed for something to be accessible, there's no point just kind of making it work with a screen reader and making sure you got your HTML markup. It's actually got to be usable. You've got to be able to find the content easily. You've got to be able to digest and consume that information really easily. It's about removing those barriers for everyone, and that benefits everyone. It's not just people with particular access needs. And the overall result, we took 1,700 pages of content and really cut it down to 450 pages of easy to read, and hopefully, I think anyway, easy to find content, which we're really pleased with. And this is what we ended up with, which we're really excited and really proud, and suddenly I'm sleeping a lot better than I did at the start of the project. Alongside this is just one of our website, or one of our platforms. It's the biggest platform. It's our shop window, but we've got lots of other parts of our digital ecosystem, as I like to call it, our outward-facing digital real estate. I thought, well, we need to apply this, what we've done here, we need to start embedding this into everything we do. So we put together this framework based on our learnings in the project. So we had our website, which was new, and at the same time, we rebranded our community, our portal, where we deliver a lot of our services, our online services, our campaigning platform. We've got other small microsites for some of our fundraising efforts. We've got a microsite with Virgin Media for one of our partnerships there. And Mindful Monsters, I don't know if anyone's come across Mindful Monsters, but if anyone's got kids under the age of 10, this is amazing. It's doing really well for us. We're getting great feedback. It's just about mindfulness for children. And it's growing a lot, and we're launching a lot of new platforms on that at the moment. So the one on the right, launched a couple of weeks ago, is our online shop. So, to do this, to support it, we created this concept of pillars, and 6 pillars we came up with. So the first 3 are about getting it right the first time, and I picked up quite early on at Scope that we weren't very good at procurement, and quite often we would procure it all, and suddenly we'd roll it out, and this is quite often internally for like an HR system or something, and we hadn't actually checked it for accessibility, and suddenly you're rolling out something that not all of your internal users could use. So we thought, right, we've got to embed accessibility questions and thinking right at the beginning into the RFIs, into the RFPs. It's part of our architectural principles. So, and by those I mean, it includes things like data protection and GDPR and security. How does it fit in with the rest of our real estate? The development stuff I've already spoken about, it's kind of capturing that in just a couple of bullets. Then there's training. We're starting to develop a set of training guides and comms. We've got a Microsoft team, which is a bit like Slack, for those of people who haven't heard it, where people can ask questions and ask for support. So that's all right. When we build stuff, when we do new things, let's get those 3 things right. The next 3 pillars was all about the checks and assurance. Once something's live, how do we ensure it's live? It's not just a moment in time, hey, yes, we're accessible, let's go, we can forget about it. It's an ongoing thing, we all know this. So we came up with 3 things. So manual testing. So my team, the digital service team, they all know about this. They can all do their own testing, but we've got 2 people, as I mentioned, who have a lot of knowledge now and a lot of experience doing this kind of testing. They can support the entire team, the entire organization, these tests. And also testing with disabled people, testing with our audiences, testing with assistive technology like screen readers. We're starting to use Site Improve, so just having that continuous testing all the way through. And then also having external audits as well. And this checks and assurance, I'll come into it in a minute, but it's a flexed approach. And we publish these results, we publish on the website. We also report on this as a KPI to the board as part of our department's KPIs. And it's really important for us that we're transparent and open and honest about this and show, look, we know we're not perfect, but we're on a journey, we're committed to the journey of being better. And that helps us to encourage feedback. And these 6 pillars are supported by our accessibility partner at key points in the journey. So what does that look like in terms of our categories of risk and the checks and insurance? Because there's no point spending the same amount of effort trying to get our website, which we know gets loads of traffic, really, really good at investing as much time and effort into that, versus something like one of our fundraising platforms, which might only get a couple of thousand visits a month. So we came up with the concept of the AX factor, which we really liked. So that's the calculations. We take the number of thousand visits per month times the number of changes per year, because we think the more traffic it gets, the more often a platform changes, the higher the risk of there being something wrong with it. So for anything over 5,000, we said, right, that's a high risk category. So it's over here. Then medium and low, so anything under low is 500. And for this, we did, so the approach for the high testing, we do our own internal QA testing. We test with assistive technology, so we've got a set of devices we can use. We do an external audit, and we use Site Improve as well. And this gives us an idea of how frequently we do it. This is still very new, so we're still refining this. For the medium size, we don't, which one do we do? We don't do tests on internal technology, and we do the internal testing less frequently. And for the low, it's just internal, and it should be off the page here. We use Site Improve on those as well. What that looks like for our websites, so our website gets about 250,000 visits a month, changes every week, right? So it gives us an AX factor of 13,000, and falls into those high categories. Community as well is high. Mindful monsters, not quite as risky, we feel, so we don't put so much effort into ensuring it's as accessible. The last thing in the 6 things I was talking about that we've done is, as everyone should be now following BS 8878, if I remember the number correctly, thank you. And also following the guidelines for the public sector that came out in September. I'm looking at Alistair for this. It came in September last year. Yes, accessibility regulations, so not guidelines, regulations. So in terms of one of the things you're doing is publishing and stating that this is where we know we've got issues. PDFs are a nightmare for us. We've got loads of PDFs, and loads of them are really badly put together. So we're on a process now. We've got a list of how popular there are, and we're going through those and kind of remarking them up and recreating so they are accessible, and we'll work for screen readers. One of the other things we're doing, which is trying to go a little bit beyond this, is actually starting to publish feedback from users. This is something we've committed to, so every time someone says, look, you're not doing this right, or I've got an issue with this, we'll publish this, and we'll review this every quarter and publish those stats. And it's a bit like when I worked in financial services, every quarter you had to publish your complaints statistics and say, right, this is how many complaints we've had, this is how many have gone to the financial ombudsman, and this is where they've gone to. And it's a similar kind of process, but not as scary and not as big scale. And we want to encourage more feedback because we're not getting that much. But it's all about ensuring that people know they're listened to. And when people do provide feedback, we can say, yeah, we're listening to you. You can tell us more, and we've done something about it. Some reflections on the project and kind of where we've been in the last kind of 18 months since we started this journey. How many developers are there in the room? Hands, quite a few, right? You guys love a challenge, yeah? My wife's a developer. She's amazing, and she's always, the time I find her the most excited and also the most frustrated is when she's learning something new. And what I found is developers can actually become completely obsessed with accessibility. If you say, right, this is your job, this is what I want you to do. With Will, who is the front-end developer, Aqueduct, the number of times, well, first of all, he said to us, right, I've got this, I'm going to make this brilliant, best accessible website ever. And every time I spoke to our project manager there or the CEO, said, oh, Ceri, Will's really obsessed with accessibility. And that was really cool. It was great to hear that. And I think, how can we open this up? How can we make it easier for developers and everyone who works with accessibility when they're creating things? Make it easier for them to do their jobs and kind of empower them to do it. So one of the things we started thinking about is, and Annie and I talk about this quite a lot, is how do we make accessibility more accessible? It's a really long word. It's really hard to say. It's like 13 letters, 6 syllables. It's ridiculous. I'm going to say something controversial, and I apologize. I really struggle with A11Y as a concept because it's, for someone who's new to this world, it doesn't really mean much. And the first time I came across it, I was like, oh, what does that mean? So, our perception is maybe this is just how, we talk about it within the accessibility community versus how do developers talk about accessibility, or how could they talk about accessibility? So at Scope, we've started talking about accessibility as AX. The reason being, it looks fantastic with UX. It just sits perfectly. And the amazing thing is, if you do a really good job of doing accessibility, you've got a long way down the road of making really good usability as well. On the flip side, if you're doing really good usability, if you do that really well, you're a long way down to creating a really accessible experience as well. And I think that's really, really key. So, a while ago, certainly 10 years ago when I had that first phone call and that first 7 years of my career, I thought accessibility was really difficult. I thought it was something else someone else did and like, how are we going to learn this? And it seemed quite impenetrable. But I don't think it is anymore. And I think about the effort and the investment we've made in this project and at Scope in the last kind of 18 months. It just needs commitment and it just needs empowerment. So it needs people who are involved who are going to make a difference, to be empowered, to learn, to be able to do their jobs and kind of do their best they can for the users. And lastly, I'd just say, I think really important to have a really clear ambition of what you want to achieve with accessibility. Having really great partners to work with, whether it's an accessibility partner who can help upskill, help support you, whether it's a development agency you're working with if it's external, can create fantastic results for everyone. And thank you.
So I'm going to pick some. Ben, do you want to grab one of those and do the other side of the ring? So I'm going to pick some questions from here first. So we've got a couple of questions around procurement. So what do your RFP questions look like? What's the response been like from suppliers? RFP, is that request?
Request for proposal.
Okay, yep.
RFI, request for information. Sorry, I know it's not very accessible using acronyms in a presentation. It's been really mixed. We don't have a set of standard questions in our procurement process, but it's something we do for every project. Every time the procurement team pick up a project which has some kind of digital requirement, they look at it, and a lot of the feedback, quite honestly, is amazing people just have never heard of accessibility, and it's actually really challenging.
Yep.
And I think sometimes we get to the point where we actually choose the partner or the solution that are most committed to making a change, because we think, well, if we can help them improve the change and then embed that into the core product and roll it out to all their clients, that's a win for more than just us.
So that actually is related to one of the other questions of like, did you find it hard to find suppliers that could provide accessible things?
Yeah, I mean, certainly not building a website. That was easy. But certainly for other things we have done, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. We've got a question here. Do you provide BSL and Easy Read on the website? No, we don't. It's something we spoke about. And I think this is one of the times I get slightly uncomfortable because I'm not an expert in this field at all. But certainly,
the concept of kind of what's reasonable for us to do and the cost of providing BSL is quite a lot. So we've taken the decision at this point not to do it. It's something we might explore in the future down the line.
Cool. Okay. Then we've got a load of questions that are kind of around the user testing. So what was the profile of the users of the user testers?
So we tried to get a range of people with different needs. Not all of them were disabled, but they would have a different range of access needs. Some people using screen readers, and I think what was quite amazing, not on this project, but a previous one, we tried to test something on our portal, and they couldn't even get past the login screen, and that was really eye-opening for us. Unfortunate pun. Yeah, so range of people with different access needs, different ages.
Okay.
Yep.
And can you talk a little bit how you use them? Like, is it just traditional usability testing, or is it feedback, or kind of do they do lots of different types of activities?
It was mainly just a one-on-one usability test. So yeah, just sitting down with them for anything from half an hour to an hour, just going through key journeys on the side and just getting their feedback.
Do you include children in your testing, especially for websites aimed at children?
No, because all our websites are aimed at adults, but we are in the process of building, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say, but you won't share it, right? We're in the process of building an app for our Mindful Monsters product, which will be for children. And then, yes, that's going to be tested in the next couple of weeks.
Brilliant. So then leading on, so you talked about co-creation with disabled people. Can you give an example or two of how people with disabilities influence the design or functionality? Okay.
I mean, I guess certainly on this project, there were certainly I don't know if you remember, I was talking about the information architecture and the design of that menu. There's quite a bit of that which people found challenging, so we had to play around with that, and certainly the language we used. Trying to get people to find that section of the website is really important to us, the information and advice. And in the user testing we did with disabled people, they couldn't see the button, so making that button really clear, and it's actually quite long if you go to the website. And we kind of tried it ironically to make it really long descriptive, but it actually works. So yeah.
Cool. We've then got a few about tools. So was automated testing used during the testing of the Scope website? And if so, what was used and which is the most reliable? And how did you pick the automated tool that you used?
So we didn't use any automated tools. During the build process, we used Site Improve Now. Actually, I stand corrected. We used Site Improve right at the end when we got it connected and Site Improve could see infrastructure. But that was the only one we used. And we used it mainly from that perspective around the content QA and kind of classic things and spelling and grammar and kind of broken links and things like that.
Cool. I'm constantly surprised at how many disability charities have inaccessible websites. What's your silver bullet bit of advice for other charities?
Do this? I don't know. I think the key thing is finding someone to work with who can help upskill your team. I think that's the first thing. It doesn't take a huge investment to do it. You know, you think about the investment you make versus the quality, you know, the impact and the experience you can develop for everyone. I think that's really key. And then it's just getting buy-in from whoever holds the purse strings, you know, at senior level, to say, look, we are going to do this. This is our plan. Get everyone to buy into doing it.
So that leads really well into this question. So I have a struggle getting my 2 directors to cough up resources for people and money to take accessibility seriously. How do you convince the board? Is it until they get a fine?
It's quite interesting. Alongside this, we have another project running called The Big Hack, which is a digital influencing thing. And part of that is looking at the business case for inclusive design and accessibility. There's lots of research about this. You know, I don't know it off the top of my head. I'm not, you know, as close as I probably should be to that side of things, but I think the business case to provide an accessible experience for the 20% of people who need it is really significant. And the thing is, if you're doing accessibility well, if you commit to it, it actually helps everyone because everyone needs it at some point. And it's just really important to do.
Mm-hmm. What was the biggest challenge when upskilling QAs in the development team?
I think the development team were pretty good actually already. I don't think that was particularly difficult. Oh, okay. I think the QAs, I guess for them, and I hope they don't mind me saying this, you know, they didn't have an awful lot of experience kind of handling digital stuff. I think, you know, I'd expect normally you would get a QA person who had been doing QA as their job all the time, and then you said, right, you know that stuff you do when you're checking code and you're checking user journeys, you also need to check all these things as well. So it's a little bit of change for them, but I think they had a really, really good understanding of disability and the challenges people face when things aren't accessible for them. So that was really, really a great start.
Last question from here, and then we'll go to the audience. Are there any standard guidelines where we can say, if we meet them, that the site is accessible?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, I don't think any site can ever be claimed to be fully accessible. I think that's really challenging because things change all the time, right? You know, you're always making changes to the website, whether it's content or code releases. But certainly the WCAG Act 2.1 guidelines, the BS 8878 are out there as well. So there's plenty of things to go to.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any questions from people in the audience? Over here first.
Hello there. You mentioned that you created a panel.
Yes.
Can you talk me through how you went about doing that?
So it doesn't sit within my team. It's a panel that we use across Scope. So Scope does lots of things. We're a kind of campaigning organization as well. We do a lot of research as well as delivering services for disabled people. So the panel, we advertise for people on our community platform. We get a lot of traffic for that. And we just incentivize people to join the panel. And it's growing all the time.
Okay, so that community panel. Sorry, just another question
Yep.
then. So the community panel, has that got specific outreach to like disability organisations because of it?
Yeah.
Do you know that you're going to attract the proportion that you would need for regular
certainly,
testing?
that community forum, the large percentage of people who engage with that forum are disabled people, both asking questions and supporting other people there who are asking those questions. We've got quite a lot of connections with DPOs who feature on the community as well. That's something we're actively looking to grow.
Okay, thank you.
What's a DPO?
DPO is a disabled people's organisation.
Hey, Ceri.
Hey.
So I just wanted to say back to you, thank you so much. It was awesome working with you as well.
Cool, thank you.
And so there's so much about what you presented that is really, really exciting. I think the thing that I've never ever seen anywhere else, and I just wanted to A, just bring people's attention to it, and B, see how it's going, is that whole commitment to transparency of those comments back. When in BS 8878 we said it would be really good to say what your website can't do and all of the limitations, everyone thought we were insane and we were going to get loads of lawyers. People have come alongside that. I think you've taken it that one step further. So I think that's absolutely amazing. Yeah. How's it going?
So honestly, we don't get a huge amount of feedback, and I don't know whether that's because we do a really good job and there's nothing to say. I'm sure it's not. We have got probably 3 comments so far of things we've picked up that we will publish in about 7 weeks when we've got through our first quarter cycle. But we need more, and I think that's something we've certainly picked up in kind of various talks I've been to, where you would get people saying, you know, who have no useful eyesight, and they're saying, look, if they were to complain about every single website they came across that wasn't accessible, that's all they'd ever do. But it's how can we start that conversation so people know that they can help to make things better.
Yeah. I say good luck.
Cool, thank you.
I think there's a question right at the back there, Ben.
Hi, I just have one question. You were saying that you were following, sorry, can you hear me? Better?
Just about.
Okay, I will try. So basically you were saying that you were following an inclusive design approach. And I was wondering how many people with disabilities, when did you include in every round of testing, and
Yeah.
how many people without disabilities did you include in every round of testing?
Okay. I didn't do the testing, so I can't give you an accurate answer, but I believe it's about at least 80–90% of people had some kind of disability.
Okay.
So the majority, yes.
So the majority
Because
of them.
we got them from our panel, and everyone on our panel has a disability.
Okay, so most of them had a disability.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
So I've got a question, actually. So
Cool.
with all of the testing you did with people with disabilities,
Yep.
was there any findings that came out about improvements that people should be making to their websites that aren't captured by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines?
Can I get back to you on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly go and find out and ask the team
Yeah.
if there was, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Because I think like you're in a really unique position where your website is predominantly used by people with
Yeah.
disabilities. You've done loads of testing.
Yep.
It would be fascinating to find out, kind of what has
Yeah.
been found by that.
Yeah.
So I will chat
Cool.
to you separately about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, cool.
I've probably got time for one last question, if anyone's got a question.
Is there anything that you'd have liked to have on your website that you couldn't have on because it wouldn't have met the guidelines?
That's really interesting. I honestly think, no, I don't think there is. I think there was no point in the project where we thought, actually, no, we can't do that.
So they didn't constrain you?
No, not at all. I think the biggest challenge was doing that kind of mega menu, that information architecture, because that was really complex, how we structured that and how we did it. We spent a lot of time talking about it and testing it, but at some point we think, oh, maybe we can't do this, but we plowed ahead and we tested it and it does work. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
If you can put your hands together and say a huge thank you. So we've got a half an hour break now. If you want to make your way next door, there should be lots of drinks left. I'm not sure if there's any food left, but yeah, do have some drinks, have some chats. We'll be starting the next talk at 8:15. So yeah, start making your way back about 8:10. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's the first time that we've used the question app, and I think really excited to have David speaking the second talk. David and Barclays have been a massive supporter of the London Accessibility Meetup. They're also a massive supporter of accessibility in general. If people have been to TechShare Pro or seen Inclusive24 or Access Chat, Barclays are support, and the Scottish accessibility meetups and conferences, they're really supporting the accessibility community. They're also sharing and publishing lots of the resources that they've created in-house. So do check out the Barclays accessibility pages. And yeah, please welcome David to the stage. He's going to talk about building inclusive products for vulnerable customers.
There it is. Well, thank you very much. I think it's, we love being part of the accessibility community. We love being part of London Accessibility Meetup, and there's some more cool stuff coming from us this year around sponsorship and support outside of London, because we realise that as much as we all live in the centre of the world, as London often gets perceived as, there's a whole world of people outside of London that also know about accessibility. It's one of those things that we don't talk about very much. It's a bit of an awkward topic sometimes, and I think often people don't feel comfortable talking about vulnerability because there's a perception that if you're vulnerable, maybe you're weak, or sorry, I'm just going to put that on flight mode, or that actually it's a negative thing, and people aren't that keen to tell a bank that they're vulnerable for fear that we might take away their credit card or take away their house or never give them finance again in the future. And so that's why talking about people and talking about situations when you might be vulnerable is really, really important and is getting increasing focus in financial services, as you'll see through my presentation. I first gave this talk about a year ago, just before World Mental Health Awareness Week, and it really worked, this talk, just before that, because I got to tell the audience about the fact that it was Mental Health Awareness Week, and lots of people didn't know that. And then I got to tell the audience about my dad, and how this talk was actually inspired by him. So my dad has bipolar, and he won't mind me telling you that, because he's also, if you know the campaign, he's also the inspiration for a campaign called This Is Me, which Barclays started in 2013 and is now spread to a couple of hundred companies around the world. And it's a storytelling campaign, and he was the inspiration for that as well. But the fact that my dad has bipolar doesn't mean that he's always vulnerable, but it means that sometimes he's really, really vulnerable, particularly with money, because one of the symptoms of bipolar, and particularly the manic elements of bipolar, is just a bit of a, I don't really care about the future. I don't really need to worry about money because there's always going to be money there for me, and so I go out and spend lots of it, even if I don't have it. And that's definitely the case in my dad's situation. Now, luckily, my mum has had a lifetime of living with my dad's bipolar, as has he, and they were set up and ready 10 years ago when he had a really, really bad series of manic and depressive cycles. But not everybody is as lucky as that, and so what I want you to think about through this talk is that whilst I'm going to frame this from a financial services point of view, we all have a duty to make sure that we think about vulnerability and people who could be vulnerable using your products and services through the design and development and testing of the things that you build. So, before I talk any more about vulnerability, I have to do the obligatory advertisement. So how many of you know who Barclays are? How many of you happen to be customers of Barclays? Good. The complaints line is, no, anyway. So, I'll try and get that in. So for those of you who don't know, Barclays is more than a retail bank. We're more than just the bank on the high street. We are what's called a full-service universal bank, and that basically means if there's a financial requirement that you have, we probably have a product to suit you. So whether that's like your first bank account that you're ever going to need, or a mortgage for your house, or a hedging product for your international organisation who wants to head on the euro-dollar exchange rate, then there's probably something we can do for you. That's the advertisement over. So we're relatively large. We've got smaller over the last couple of years for various reasons. So there's about 80,000 of us. and we service about 48 million customers across the world, and about 36 million of those are in the UK. And we've got this ambition, so we've got an ambition to become the most accessible and inclusive FTSE company for everybody. So this says customers and clients. We also mean colleagues as well, because we see our colleagues as customers as well. But what's nice about this statement is that for us, clients means anybody who's not a retail customer. So if you're not on the high street, if you're not just somebody wanting to put their savings into an ISA, for example, then you're a customer. If you want to do something more interesting than that, you're a client. So we don't have a reason for doing that other than the fact that it's the right thing to do. Advertisement over. Vulnerability. As I said, it's become quite a hot topic in financial services over the last couple of years. So much so that the FCA, who is one of the main regulators in the UK, decided that we should define what vulnerability means and what vulnerable circumstances mean. So this is the definition they came up with. I'm going to read it because it's not particularly useful. Well, it's very useful, sorry. It's very useful, but not particularly well written sometimes, and doesn't make a huge lot of sense a lot of the time. But it says, so someone who is in a vulnerable circumstance is someone who, due to their personal circumstances, is especially susceptible to detriment, particularly when a firm is not acting with appropriate levels of care. Basically what they meant was if you don't think about people who may be vulnerable, they might lose some money, or they might not be able to access your services in the way that you intended them to. And they came up with this definition a couple of years ago, and it's one that actually, if you took out of financial services, and if you took out of the word firm, because that's a very financial services word, actually this could apply to any industry. And basically says, make sure you look after your customers, otherwise you're going to cause them problems. Now I want you to talk a little bit, before I talk about vulnerability too much more, about the different types of impairment and the kind of different groupings of impairments that we broadly see in the accessibility and inclusive design world. And I wanted to make sure that we're clear on the difference between a vulnerability and an impairment. Okay? So broadly speaking, we think, and I think there's a general consensus around the fact that there are three groups of impairment. So you've got permanent impairment, which we all would probably say and group as a disability. So it's something that lasts longer than 12 months. In this case, the loss of a lower arm. There's temporary impairment, which is basically injuries and short-term health conditions. In this case, a broken arm. And then there's situational impairment, which is the thing that you are doing right now is causing you to be impaired. And that tends to be super short term. In this case, it's a parent holding a child in their dominant arm. Now, when you look at these people from an pure accessibility point of view, they all have the same requirement. They can't use one of their arms. Okay? But whether they are vulnerable or not will depend on how well you have designed the website or the application or whatever it happens to be that they want to use at that point in time. So if it's a mobile phone, if it's a mobile app, then as long as they can use the app with the hand that that isn't impaired, then they're not vulnerable. But if they can't, then they could be vulnerable. Now, vulnerability is one of those really hard to define things. It's not an exhaustive list. It's not like a set of disabilities where I can tell you, here are all of the opportunities to be vulnerable. But what I can do is help to explore a whole host of different situations where you might be vulnerable. And some of these, when I've given this talk before, people don't always agree with them. But let's see how we get on. I shouldn't have drank a Coke, because it's making me really, really burp quite a lot. Apologies. And that's on the live stream. Great. Hi, Mum. So buying your first house. How many of you have, in the last 12 months, bought your first house? Congratulations. How many of you have moved house in the last 12 months? I moved about a month ago. Theoretically, that process could make you vulnerable. Because, particularly if you're a first-time buyer, that is a scary thing to be doing, right? There's not a huge amount of good information out there about buying your first house. And so because that's a financial situation, that this is the first time that you've done it, because you're only ever a first-time buyer once, you could be vulnerable in that circumstance. Same with having your first child or having any X number of children, both from the point of view of the fact that one of the people in your relationship or you yourself are losing an employment or are losing some level of financial input into your life, and the fact that you don't then know how long you might be out of employment, and then the fact that you have the stress of dealing with this new person in your life could make you vulnerable. So could losing a loved one. Couldn't find a graphic for that, so we've got a slightly older lady. So losing a loved one could make you vulnerable, because grief does that, can make people vulnerable. As can, this is gambling addiction, because I couldn't find a graphic for gambling addiction. We'll talk more about gambling addiction later on in the talk, so remember that one. Losing your job. I kind of thought he was like a waiter, and so he might be on 0 hours contract, and so he might lose it. Anyway, you can tell that we have a relatively limited set of graphics we can use. Age at both ends of the spectrum could make you vulnerable. So if you're young, and this is from a financial services point of view, I should have said. If you're young or if you're older, you may be vulnerable. I hate saying this one. If you have a non-standard banking requirement, I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. Or if you have a disability, again, you could be vulnerable. Doesn't necessarily mean you are. A non-standard banking requirement basically means if you aren't in full-time employment and you can guarantee your income, or if you've gone away and come back again. So if you're in the armed services, you've gone out and been deployed and then come back to the UK, for example, that could make you vulnerable because you've not had to look after yourself financially for a certain amount of time, and you have no proof and no sort of history of a banking relationship. That could make you vulnerable. But like I said, it's all about could make you vulnerable and not does make you vulnerable, because vulnerability is circumstantial and it's individual, so it's personal to the individual. Right. Okay, I didn't mean to show that slide. So what I wanted to do was to see whether we could have some ideas about the scale of vulnerability in the UK. Now, the last talk stole one of my answers to one of my questions, so we'll see whether anybody remembers. So the average reading age in the UK is, oh, I heard 7 and 9. Oh, there was a 7, 9. Well done. Yeah, so it's 9. We'll look at that in a second. The percentage of UK adults who have less than £300 in savings. Any guesses? 20? 40? What was it over here? 70%. It's about 50%. So half of UK adults have less than £300 in savings. I'm trying to remember what else is on the slide. The numeracy, the number of adults in the UK who have a numeracy level lower than 11. Percentage or fractions? It's the same thing. Okay, we'll not do too much guesswork, but yeah, so 1 in 7 adults in the UK have a reading age of 11 or lower. 1 in 2 adults in the UK have a numeracy level expected of a child of 11 or below. Just as a reminder, 11 is the age of you are before you go to secondary school. So this is primary school levels of numeracy and literacy. 1 in 2 adults in the UK have less than £300 in savings. 300 quid, really? By 2020, half of the UK population will have had a cancer diagnosis. 1 in 6 people over 80 have dementia, and 1 in 8 adults, have an unpaid caring responsibility for a friend or family member. This data is from a guide from 2017 from the British Insurers Association. Coke again. The literacy one always shocks me, if I'm quite honest. Does anyone know what the reading age of the Times newspaper is? 13, 14, 16, 12, it's 11. Yeah, and the Sun newspaper? 8, 7, 16 months, 4, It's about 7, give or take, depending on which person you're reading. Not that that particularly matters in the Sun, but there you go. So vulnerability is actually much more prolific in the UK population than people think. And I kind of think this data proves that. The 1 in 2 UK adults without £300 or more than £300 in savings, is it any wonder that rough sleeping is increasing? Is it any wonder that sofa surfing is increasing? Because you're 2 paychecks away from living on the street. Statistically speaking, most people are 2 paychecks away. Just let that sink in. So from a financial services point of view, vulnerability is super, super scary and super important. So how do you apply inclusive design principles to vulnerability? Well, you start with some good principles, like these ones from the Paciello group. So these are a set of inclusive design principles that you can get from inclusivedesignprinciples.org. It's a really nice resource if you haven't seen it before, but it's focused around these 7 principles. So providing a comparable experience, giving control, offering choice, considering situation, being consistent, prioritizing content, and adding value. Now I want to really quickly look at 3 of these. And I'm not going to choose consider situation, because we've talked about the fact that this is situational. That would be the easy one. But what we are going to have a look at very quickly is give control, prioritize content, and add value. So I'm going to use some Barclays and other financial services examples in here. I'm using them for illustration. I'm not saying they are perfect, because they're definitely not. But I wanted to have something to demonstrate on screen for some of them. Not this one, though. So giving control. So this definition of giving control is directly from the principles. So give control says that you should ensure that people are in control and that people should be able to access and interact with content in their preferred way. How many people use Amazon one-click? How many people have the day after shame of using Amazon one-click? Yeah. So I think as a society, we've become more and more used to the removal of friction in processes. And it's really dangerous from a vulnerability point of view. And you'll see that in a little bit when I talk about gambling addiction and how we can better support people with gambling addiction. But there's some things that we can do that don't force friction down people's throats, but that give people the choice of adding some friction back in again. And the examples that I've given on screen are things like if you have the ability to slow down someone's checkout experience, or the ability to slow down someone's delivery experience if they so choose. So for example, and you'll see an example later on from Monzo, we're actually putting some delays into the process, particularly when people know that they have vulnerability around late night shopping. Will really help remove some of the angst around that. And I've sort of said about alerting other people of late night shopping. We had a couple of examples last year of some customers who told us that they had what they called the pride and shame loop of online shopping, where they were completely in the moment and really wanted that new pair of shoes or that new phone or that new television or those awesome new trousers or whatever it was that they wanted. And they clicked buy and they went to bed at 2 a.m. because that's the time they were doing it at. And then by 7 a.m. when they woke up and saw the email, they were like, oh my God, what have I done? I've bought £12,000 worth of clothes in the last month and I really need to do something about that. So the idea here is that you add extra people into the process, and you can see we've got this idea of guardians and helpers. They kind of say, this person's just done this. They've told us that actually this type of behavior is the things they do when they're vulnerable. Do you want to reach out to them? Or could you approve this transaction for them? Now, I'm not saying that you should do that by default. What I'm saying is that giving people the option to add friction back in is much better than allowing people to go back into that shame loop. And actually, probably will save some money from an organization's point of view, because returns to online shopping brands continues to rise, and it only continues to cause problems environmentally and financially for organizations. The next one was prioritize content. So this is about helping users to focus on core tasks, features, and information by prioritizing prioritizing them within content and layout. I don't know about you, but I get to some websites sometimes and I just go, what am I doing here? I knew that I came here for a reason, but I'm having a moment and I just can't remember why I'm here because there's too much going on. There's a really nice talk from an amazing guy called Eric Myers, who is a bit of a, from what I understand, a bit of a genie in the CSS world. In 2015, he talked about the need to design for crisis and how organizations who support individuals financially, emotionally, and from a medical point of view, or indeed when they're in critical circumstances, need to better design their websites for crisis. So picture the situation that Eric was in 2014, I think it was 2014, where his daughter, on a holiday, hundreds and hundreds of miles away from their home, collapsed and was seriously ill and was airlifted to hospital in a city that he didn't know and in a hospital that he had never been to. And he talks in his YouTube video, which I recommend that you watch, about sitting in the back of a stranger's car, driving at speed to the hospital, on the hospital's website, furiously trying to find where on earth his daughter was, and completely missed the fact there was a telephone number on the website for him to call, because that was not his frame of mind. He was holding a mobile phone, because that's what he was using to stuff, and the fact that there was a telephone number completely just didn't register with him. It's a fantastic and very emotional talk, and I'd really recommend that you watch it. But designing with those types of vulnerabilities in mind helps us to think about the edge cases and the reasons why people are coming to us. And I'll show you in a second something that we've introduced relatively recently on our website, where we prioritize content based on what's happening in the world at any particular time. But examples where this is really important are the things like the death of a loved one, and we're going to talk about that in a second, financial worries like gambling addiction, and issues that are beyond their control. So increasingly we're seeing administration of companies as companies go out of business, and we've seen quite a lot of that recently, but often it leaves people vulnerable, particularly with airlines going bust. There's an example of Premier Air a couple of months ago, and another one since. Imagine if you're in a different country and your airline goes bust, and the vulnerability that you feel at that moment in time, and how people connected to that process should be there and able to support you. Now, I can't go through a talk at this point in the year and at this point where we are politically without mentioning Brexit. So I'm going to mention it once, and once only to demonstrate a point. So this is the Barclays homepage right now. Please don't look too much. We're going to move on quite quickly. But what I wanted to do is just to highlight that this space here, so half of our screen real estate right now and above the fold, is dedicated to Brexit. Because lots of people are very, very worried about what it means for them financially. Before they put this up, it was the #1 search thing on our website. They used that data to go, right, people are worried about it, we're going to prioritize that content and put it on the screen. Because people are not going to know on this website, with this navigation, where they're going to find anything about Brexit. So it goes here, right front and center. Now it should be up here, if we're thinking about it from a purely inclusive design point of view, but this is, we can't, it's marketing content, so this is where the money is, apparently. Whereas this, hopefully, and what's nice about this, actually when you go through to here, and you'll see in a second, we don't just talk about what it means from a financial services point of view and your banking relationship with Barclays. We try to say, look, this is our view of Brexit. It's not pretty, but here's how we're going to help you get through it. And I think it's really important that organizations take a more holistic view when they think about how they support people in vulnerable circumstances, or circumstances when people are really genuinely scared about what's going on. The reason I wanted to show you this page, though, was not just because of Brexit. And actually, talking about Premier Air, the first time I gave that talk, it was a couple of days after this talk. It was a couple of days after Premier Air went bust, and we had a similar message here that says, don't panic, we'll help you through it. If you came to this page and you knew somebody that you loved had just died, and that they banked with Barclays, and that the money that you needed to organize their funeral was inside that account, where would you go? how would you get the information? So I thought people might go to one of three places. They might go to search, they might go to contact us, or if they're particularly unusual, they might go to service and support, because I don't think that represents anything particularly good. If they did go to services and support, this is what they'd see. There is a help option here, but it's alongside lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of other options. If they searched, they'd get here. And if they happen to search for death, then the first result is what to do if someone dies. Interestingly, the third result is what happens if your batteries die. Anyway, both of these two they say the same thing. They actually go to the same place, but the reason that they're written slightly differently is because the data showed that people were searching slightly different things. And so we wrote the SEO function that sits in behind here to make sure that the search is right, pulls back two options, just in case people want to phrase things differently. The reason I wanted to show this particular example isn't because of how people get there, but because of this page. This is what happens when you finally get to the page about death. The thing that I liked is that the first thing we tell you isn't how you tell us about what to do when someone dies. It says what you should do first before you come to us. So this accordion here, the second one, is what you should tell Barclays. But we only tell you that once we've helped you understand the process generally for telling organizations that someone has died, because I don't know about you, but I wouldn't know how to do that. What I'd probably do is go, oh my God, I can't afford a funeral. I wonder if they had any money saved for a funeral. I wonder if they had who was their bank account with? Right, well, let's go and ask them. But you can't do these other steps, any of these other steps, until you've done this first one. And if you didn't know already, there's a service called Tell Us Once from the government, which means you can literally tell the government once about a death. There's a similar service in financial services that has come up. It's a separate service, but that does the same thing. But this goes back to the point that I was making earlier about the responsibility that organizations have for dealing with vulnerability. It's not just about saying, well, we're going to tell you what you need to do for us and just us. I think it extends into, look, we realize this is a tough space for you to be in right now. Here's how you can do stuff and how you can be supported a bit more. The last one was add value. So this is about considering the features that the person holds in their hand, because they're probably using a smartphone that's got more power in it than processing power than computers did for 20, 30 years. And how we can use that to improve their experience. So that could be things like using location services to provide support for people who are in vulnerable circumstances. So the example I gave was, if you're on holiday and something happens, where's the nearest branch that you could go to? Because some Barclays used to have services and branches in other countries, for example. Or indeed providing things like live chat on pages of help and support, because often people don't want to pick up the phone, particularly if they're vulnerable from a financial point of view. People find it really difficult to talk about money. Generally, some of you might have seen, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, some of you might have seen the Lloyd's adverts that are running at the moment called around the M word. Basically, they're trying to do something like this, where they're trying to encourage people to talk about money, because we, as a nation, we're a bit repressed when it comes to talking about money, and it's really dangerous, and we do need to be better at it. I wanted to, how am I doing for time, Al? Okay, cool, I'll rattle through this stuff. So I wanted to talk really quickly about building in friction. I'm going to show you a Barclays example, a non-Barclays example, and then like a extra one, because I think there's some really nice stuff going on in this space. So this is the Barclays mobile banking app, and I want to talk about gambling addiction for a second. And I want to talk about it because I have some statistics on it, which helps. So 430,000 UK adults have a gambling addiction. And the Gambling Commission estimates that nearly 2 million people are at risk of becoming addicted. to gambling, which, given the climate that we live in, where every advert on Facebook videos is for a gambling company, and when you're watching any sport, you've got gambling stuff thrown at you constantly, so it's unsurprising that we have a problem with gambling. But we kind of have recognised that we need to empower people to have more control over their finances. And so at the end of last year, we introduced the ability to close certain payment channels off. So if you have the mobile banking app, you can go into merchant control. It's really badly labelled. It's not particularly accessible. But inside merchant controls, you get all of these options for things that you can switch on and off. Now, I did ask them how many people wanted to switch off the ability to buy petrol and diesel or groceries in supermarkets. But the fact that gambling is number one on here is really important. The Institute for Money, Institute for Money and Mental Health suggested that this was the approach that we should take. And you'll see in a second how Monzo have approached it. In the first 3 months of this being live, 36,000 customers accessed this page. About 9,000 of them have set a block, and half of those are a gambling block. So we know that, and we haven't advertised this particularly. It sort of was, we did it through the news once, and this self-exclusion is becoming really useful. There's definitely some work to do here to build out some functionality, and I'm going to show you what I think is actually better than what we have, which is rare, I think, to be able to say that. From a bank point of view, to say that we think someone else is doing better, normally everyone says that we're doing things amazingly well. Monzo have taken this a step further. They have a thing that just says block gambling transactions, and you can't switch it off without talking to somebody. Right now in the Barclays app, let me show you. So once you go in here, there's a little rocker switch, and you just flick it on and off until your heart's content. In the Monzo app, once you turn it on, you have to talk to somebody from Monzo to switch it off. And even then, when they say, OK, that's fine, it takes 48 hours to re-enable it. Now, the reason this is important is because the research from the Gambling Commission and the Money and Mental Health Institute suggests that once people get the opportunity to step away from an impulsive situation like gambling or like buying something impulsively, they're far more likely to say, actually, do you know what, that wasn't the right thing for me to do. I shouldn't do that. And so this removes this impulsive approach. Monzo reckon, and these numbers were from last year, so it's probably a lot higher, about 25,000 of their customers now have enabled this feature. Any Monzo customers in the room? I have a question for you. Keep your hands up. Put your hand down if it's not your main account. As in, if it's not the account you get your salary paid into. Right, so it's interesting that, and I use it exactly the same way. It's kind of a card over here that I like because they're doing some funky stuff, but anyway. What Monzo have not made very public is that out of these 25,000 customers who have this enabled, the cash withdrawal rate is much higher. So they've closed the problem over here and created a problem over here. You can't solve everything, but it's useful to know that this isn't a silver bullet at all. It's part of the solution. The other thing that they have proposed doing, but they haven't done, because it's really complicated, is adding late night spending option into the app. So this year, they released these designs in May 2017, before they got their banking license, so they had a bit more time to play with. And what this does, basically, if you buy after, I think it says buy after 10 p.m. After 10 p.m., then it will the next day it will send you a summary of the things that you bought when you were in that vulnerable place and say, are you sure? Do you really want to spend that £122 on eBay? Or that £93 at ASOS? I like this. It's generally, the Money and Mental Health Institute reckon this is a great way forward. There are some challenges with this. For example, how do you convince Amazon not to send something straight away? How do you switch off a Prime subscription when you've already started using it from your mobile app? Anybody know anything about open banking and the stuff going on? Yeah. So basically, open banking says that you can connect your bank account to anybody that you trust. So in theory, in the future, this is possible. Thank you. I'm nearly done. So what can you do to think about vulnerability? So include it in your design thinking, in personas, for example. Include people who've experienced vulnerability or who are currently vulnerable in research. That's a bit, I wasn't sure when I wrote this, because there's some ethical things going on around including people who are currently vulnerable in your work. So worth thinking about, but I definitely make sure you include people who have experience of vulnerability. Make it okay to tell you about vulnerability. Technology is not going to solve this problem because it'll only take us so far. The human touch is far more powerful, and we rely hugely on our colleagues in our branches and in our contact centres and who you will talk to on social media if you're so inclined to spot and to think about people who are vulnerable. Use the data to spot it and make people aware of vulnerability. Hopefully you found this talk interesting and that you found it to be a new topic. I've got a recap, but that's fine. This is how you can get in touch if you want to find out some more. This link doesn't work at the moment, so please don't go there. We're just about, so we're a couple of months out from launching a brand new accessibility portal where we're going to shove all of our resources for the first time. So hopefully that will be useful. If you want to get in touch, please do. Before I finish, I wanted to say, at the start I sort of said how proud Barclays are to be part of this community. We're really conscious that as quite a large organisation we have a role to play in this world. And on that basis, if anyone ever wants to talk about accessibility, if you want to find out more about what we do, or if you just want to spend some time with one of our consultants having a chat, then please get in touch. And we're more than happy to give some of our time to help. We won't come and do an audit for you and spend or give you training necessarily, but we will gladly give you some of our time. Thank you.
Let's start with questions from here. So, how do you check your finance how do you check your finance statement are valid to vulnerable customers, i.e. accounts are correct? Also billing, how do you communicate this via your tone of voice?
Not quite sure what you mean. That's a good question. So financial services is often held up as a really bad example of how to do plain English. We're really conscious that we don't do it well enough, and we're in the process of creating some content and copyright training. So to answer your question, we don't do it very well right now, and we want to improve. If you have any feedback, if you're a customer and you'd like to see stuff changed, get in touch, because that's the only way we're going to make progress.
How do you create your personas?
So our process for creating personas, so the personas we've got out at the moment were a combination of working with real colleagues in our organisation. We have a fantastic disability network, and we borrow heavily from colleagues' lived experiences in that network, plus complaints. So unsurprisingly, we get quite a lot of customers telling us we don't do very well, which is quite nice. Lots of them on social media. If you want to follow us on social media, you will see that we respond quite a lot to people telling us that we're not doing a great job. We actually think that that's another thing, by the way. Social media is a great place to get feedback. Have a channel specifically for getting accessibility feedback, because it's eye-opening. So we use a combination of real colleague, lived experience, complaint data, and imagination, because we had to make them quite broad.
How do you recruit vulnerable people for research?
We don't at the moment. It was a thing that I said that you should do, but at the moment we don't actively do it because we're still grappling with the ethical bit around at what point is it okay to recruit someone who is vulnerable. So if you think about someone who has who's lost someone, who's died, how do you quantify when that person is okay enough to do some research? We haven't got to a safe place with that yet as an organisation. I should have said, I suppose, at the start, we're doing some of this. We're not doing it very well. hopefully this was more of a thought piece than this is what a case study. But yeah, that's what we're grappling with right now. If anyone has any thoughts, then we'd love to hear it. But I think particularly with grief, is it 6 months? I don't know. Is it 6 years? Is it 10 years? At which point then does it become irrelevant because they've already had so long after the process that they've forgotten what they went through. And will they ever remember? So it's a difficult one.
Yeah. What helped Barclays decide to prioritise registering death before Contact Us? How was it researched?
In all honesty, I don't know because I wasn't involved in the process. It just was a nice thing that I pulled out. We have done a lot of work around things like power of attorney and around how you support people who have lost the mental capacity to manage their own finances, and registering a death sort of came out of that because it kind of, in some ways, and it's horrible to say, but in a lot of cases it's a natural progression. When someone hands over power of attorney, it's likely that they are on the roads to then, at some point in the future, needing to register a death. So it was part of that overall process, and it was part of how we redesigned the website over the last few years. So I don't know exactly why that was prioritised, but also I think some of the stuff the government have done around Tell Us Once has then improved how financial services look to do that. Cool. And a steer from the regulator has helped as well.
If you could do anything else to make Barclays or banks in general better for vulnerable users, what would you do?
Man, there's not one thing. I'd probably try and get us to use plainer English. I think that is, you saw the statistics around literacy, both numeracy and written literacy is really poor in this country. We're doing some work with kids around a program called Life Skills, which tries to do some of that, but if we're only doing that and not trying to improve ourselves, I think that's a stumbling block. So I'd like to see Barclays and other financial services organisations look to use plain English a lot more.
Cool. How many people in your accessibility team? How long has it existed, and is it global?
Oh, good questions. So there are 9 people in our accessibility team. 5 of those are consultants. 2 of them are apprentices because there's not enough talent coming through the pipeline, if I'm honest. So we've got a couple of apprentices at the moment. We've then got my boss Paul, who you might know, but he's not a consultant because he's useless. Hi Paul. And then we've got an administrator who helps with, who's primarily Paul's PA, but also does lots of other stuff for us. So yeah, we've got 5 consultants, 2 senior consultants, and 3 sort of, they're not junior consultants, but they're mid-weights. And we're all based in the UK, but we support globally. So I was doing some number crunching today. We each support about 150 products, 4,500 bits of change a year across those 44 million customers. So we see everything from the mobile phone app that you saw earlier through to our trading platforms and everything in between. So I'm tired.
How do you measure the impact of products designed for vulnerable customers?
That's a tough one. We don't actually design products for vulnerable customers. We design products for customers who at some point in their lives might be vulnerable. And I think it's important to make that distinction because in the same way that as an organisation we used to produce accessible services, excuse the language, but special services for special people, rather than continue to do that, what we have done over the last few years is go, that's very nice where we can't do something in the mainstream, but the mainstream is where we want to be. So flipping it on its head and saying, how do you check that the things that you make for everybody work for people who are vulnerable? We're starting to see that through this inclusive design work, but we haven't got a specific approach to it right now.
Cool. And last question, I think. Do Barclays provide any free support for people who are struggling to manage their finances and are having mental health issues as a result?
Yeah, so we recently launched a couple of pages on our website that talk about how you can get support if you have a mental health issue or if you are vulnerable. You can get to that from the homepage. Scroll it down, it's on the homepage. That includes a whole range of different things depending on your individual circumstances. And I don't work in our retail business, so I can't go into detail. But we have a huge team of people who sit under a program called Barclays Financial Assistance, which supports our customers when they do get into financial difficulties to make sure they can continue to do what they need to do. But some of that is also relationships with organisations like Step Change and Gamble Aware, and lots of other different organisations that our colleagues are connected into, but also get training from on a regular basis. We also run a vulnerable customers program and have a vulnerable customers team. If any of you know Catherine Townsend, she sits in the vulnerable customers team, as well as an amazing guy called Matt Robinson, whose sole focus is making sure that as a bank we become more inclusive for people with mental health issues. We're not there yet. There is hopefully some nice stuff coming later this year. But as always, if you have any thoughts and feedback as a customer or a non-customer about what you'd want to see, then at Barclays Access, if you tweet them, we always take every single bit of feedback and put it into our development teams to see whether it floats or not.
I think we're out of time, but was there anybody that wanted to ask a question but wasn't able to ask on the app? One at the back. You can make it really quick. I'm
also hanging around for a bit, so if you've got a question, just come and ask. I'm probably coming to the pub as well, if you want to come to the pub. Yeah, hey Raf.
Hi there. I was just going to ask, in relation to people with bipolar and impulsive spending specifically, what steps are Barclays and other banks doing, do you think, to try and help monitor and prevent that? Because I remember a talk a while back from someone from Monzo talking about having a relative sort of step in and put these checks on, but everyone I've known personally with bipolar wouldn't dream of letting their partner or someone close to them monitor their spending.
So I have to be careful because there's some stuff that I know is coming that I don't know enough about to be able to tell you, or that I get impaled for telling you. So the idea of someone else approve transactions is an interesting one. It has the challenges that you mentioned, and so I think that actually something like this is nicer. The challenge is always going to be, at what point does an organisation step in and say no, when it's still your money? At the end of the day, it's still your money. I think there's a difference between helping people to manage spend like this and being conscious of how you stop people from getting into a situation where they might have borrowed £30,000 on a whim. And there's always going to be that balance, and I know that it's a constant struggle to make sure that balance isn't too far in anybody's favour. I honestly don't think there's a single solution. I think a lot of it comes down to how we enable people who our customers see every day to be able to spot the signs and to have conversations. Because, like I said, technology can only take us so far. This kind of thing you can switch on and off. Yes, this one takes 48 hours to switch off. All you have to do is be able to bluff with an agent, and you can unlock it. So I don't think there is a silver bullet. There's a really nice report from the Money and Mental Health Institute on their website that talks about their recommendations, which includes some of this stuff. Even that I don't think is going to be enough to really give people certainty. So I don't have a great answer for your question, Raf, but I generally think there's a move towards recognising that banks and financial services institutions, and actually I think beyond that, all organisations have a responsibility to raise the flag and go, we don't think you're okay.
Thanks.
But it's difficult, particularly with GDPR and those types of things as well. It gets really messy, so I'm not going to talk about that. I talked about the first time I did this presentation, someone asked me about GDPR, and that went really badly. So don't ask me about that.
Awesome. Please put your hands together and say a massive thank you to David. So that brings us to the end of the 24th London Accessibility Meetup. We've got lots of thank yous to say, so I'm going to save them all up into one. So a huge thank you to our speakers, to Barclays for sponsoring us, for Sainsbury's providing this amazing venue and the technical support and the drinks hosting and those sorts of things. A huge thank you to Orla for the incredible speech to text, to Meetup Video for doing the live stream and creating the videos for us. Also, massive thank you to Raf and to Ben, and to Ben for helping help the event run smoothly. So yeah, please put your hands together and say a huge thank you. We'll be back on Thursday the 18th of April. We've got two great talks lined up. We've got two people from the accessibility team at GDS talking about the government accessibility empathy lab that we've set up. And we've got Bryn Anderson, who has albinoism, who will be sharing the barriers that he faces and what people can do to remove those barriers. So please join us for that in 4 weeks' time. Put your hands up if you might join us in the pub afterwards now. So we're going to go to a pub called the Sir Christopher Hatton. It's a 5-minute walk away, 2-minute walk away. We'll probably all go together in about 10 minutes, 15 minutes once the room is tidy. So please take the litter with you and hopefully see you soon.